Welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. It's a new week. I certainly hope you had a great weekend. I did. And if you forgive me, I should get myself all set up. I have to say that it's been taking a break from the conversation that we began a few sessions ago, in which I discussed cheating, infidelity, and more. This weekend was a useful way to connect some of the things that we have discussed, but also to reflect on some of the conversations that I have endeavored to present. And I'm going to juxtapose what we've discussed over the past week, and in many ways I'm going to juxtapose it with an experience that I have had, and an experience I also had over the weekend. I think it might provide a useful opportunity to address an aspect of the conversation we have been having concerning cheating. I'll see how much I can reveal without necessarily giving out too much, and therefore making it known as to who could be the parties involved. Let's put it that way. Let me summarize very quickly what we have discussed over the past week. I made an attempt to address the whole thing about cheating and infidelity. I tried to explain the whole process and how men think, and how women therefore could benefit from understanding how men think to enable them to connect the dots. But to do so wisely, pre the event, but also post the event. In other words, pre-mortems are very important because they can prepare you for what could happen, and they could also prepare you to prevent what could happen. Where the event is inevitable, they enable you and equip you with the ability to respond rather than to react to events when they take place. Postmortems are a useful way of actually trying to identify what went wrong. Now, I would hope that you would agree with me that if you had a choice, it's better to have done a pre-mortem rather than be faced with a post-mortem and the pain and confusion that brings. In a nutshell, that was what I was hoping, and I tried to share in the sessions from the previous week. I talked about why men go through such experiences, one of which I summarized in one sentence, that there are needs that we have as men that are innate. We are born with those. There are needs that are seasonal. They come and go. And there are needs that we acquire. It's a cultivated taste. We develop a palate for something new, or novel. And if a woman can understand a man's needs and those three categories, she can succeed and she can win. 70% or more fall within the first, our innate needs. We're born with those. About 20% fall within what I call the seasonal needs, and 10% are the acquired tastes. If a man is provided with what I consider to be the core needs, and if a woman satisfies that to the level of 70%, then she's already passed. She's scored a distinction. 70% or greater is a distinction. Now, if I'm saying 70% of a man's needs are those that he is born with, and a woman therefore who understands and knows how to relate to the said man on those core needs, if she can meet those needs, then it means she's scored 70%. She then has to contend with the other 30%. On the other hand, if she's not meeting his basic needs, it doesn't matter how much she tries or endeavors to meet his seasonal or his cultivated tastes, she still failed. So she can score 20 out of 20 in the second group and 10 out of 10 in the third group, but still fail because all she has is 30% out of 100%. Now, I went through a process of also explaining that the way cheating is defined by society from based on a man's transgressions are wrong. We cheat with our resources and whatever derivative of those resources that we provide. We also cheat if we abuse. The major responsibility we are given, primarily, we are gatekeepers to relationships. As husbands, we are like what we call, we're the ones who bind the house together. So if we fail in that aspect, then maybe to an extent, we could be labeled as breaking the rules of the agreement. Women, therefore, are judged differently from a cheating perspective, physical and emotional, and men are judged on a different standard, resources and the derivatives. And I went through the 4 Ps and I explained further. Now, I share all of that, and I've taken about 5 minutes to do so, just to make it clear as I expand into today's session that there has been a number of conversations that have taken place over a week dealing with the same subject matter, and therefore it's important to understand that layers and bricks have been built. We've been building this brick by brick. Now, let me deviate and talk about today's session. But let me preface today's session. In thinking about why men cheat, I was trying to analogize the whole experience with something that I thought perhaps could be a useful reminder women should focus on. Let me start with the first, which is the core needs of a man. Now, recognize that I'm speaking in this particular aspect to relationships and relationships that are formalized. I'm not talking about situationships and early stage, short term. I'm talking about things that have progressed beyond just the intimacy phase, whether that be marriage, some form of a common agreement, or cohabitation. But particularly marriage is the best way to deal with the aspect of cheating, because until a man is married to you, both of you are unmarried, and he owes you nothing, just in the same way technically you owe him nothing, except you've discussed and had an agreement. The basic needs I put into 3 S's: sex, servitude, serenity. Sex is what you get a man with, generally speaking, because men are visual, and sex tends to come as a byproduct at the very early stage of interacting with someone. You cannot keep a man with sex. And women make a mistake in thinking that for some reason that they hold the keys to the vault. Now, I have never met a woman, young as I am, I have never met a woman who did not think, and this is irrespective of her age, who did not think that what she had between her legs was gold dust and was sufficient to satiate a man's appetite for ejaculation. I've never met a woman who did not think that what was between her legs was so good that his thirst and his hunger for more will be satisfied in perpetuity. Sex, on the other hand, is a very trivial thing from a man's perspective. It's trivial not because it's not important. It is important. It's trivial because it's in great abundance. It's so much in abundance that the value, the price, the cost, the entry requirement has been dropped to almost nothing. However, servanthood and serenity are in short supply. Women think, generally speaking, that most of the time when men cheat, they do so because they want more sex. Yes, there is an appetite for more, which has to do with the acquired tastes. However, in most of the cases, there is something that has forced him out of your presence, and that could be a lack of servanthood and a lack of serenity. Now, this brings me very, very closely to my experience. And I'm going to juxtapose this with my experience over the weekend. I have never in my, this is very sad, but I've never in my entire life been in a group amongst people and been around men and women in an occasion where I felt that there was no admiration for the men, both those who were present and those who were absent, by the women who were supposed to be wives, long-term girlfriends, partners. This was an event, a celebratory event, and here we are, all gathered around, and the women I interacted with, without exception, spoke so very poorly about their husbands and the men around it that I could understand why men go astray. Now, let me use one particular person. And before I met this person, I had heard a conversation that had taken place just before that, in which she said to another, she spoke in speaking to another man, she said, take a look at my husband. Do you think I want to have sex with him every day or find him attractive always? But it was said in such an emasculating manner. I never met the man. I was never looking forward to meeting him, partly because a woman, based on how she speaks about her husband, reveals his character, reveals his negotiables, and reveals more about him than it does about her. The fact that he can tolerate that. In any case, in meeting this woman in particular, and we were on the table, several people, and I could hear conversations taking place, and even with conversations with me. This particular woman, when we started speaking, I made attempts to, her husband wasn't present, I made attempts to test the hypothesis that I had by asking questions. What does your husband do? How come your husband is not present? And a few other leading questions. And the idea was to see how she would speak about him. Whether she would speak about him in admiration, reverence, whether she would speak about him in awe, whether her words would be such that I would be interested in meeting him, because she spoke so gladly and warmly and joyfully and lovingly about him. Let's just say I was not disappointed. My hypothesis was correct. We have a problem, and this was not just. I could not attribute this behaviour to this particular woman alone. There were other women around with their husbands. And let me say something, ladies, so you can understand. You get the man you choose. Let me say that again. Women, you can't complain because you get the man you choose. A woman is a gatekeeper to her body, her emotions, and her womb, who she brings life into the world for. The highest honor she gives a man. Once you've given yourself to a man, you've chosen him. Now he gets to choose whether he gives you the gift of union and marriage. Most of these women had chosen men who I would consider to be beta males, fem males, lacking in masculine energy, including the ones who were there. I've never been in an occasion where the level of energy was so beta, was so weak. I've never been in that environment in my life. This was strange. So strange that I think about halfway through the event, I had to reach out to my best friend, who wasn't present, to say, this is strange, you know, that the energy here is weird. What we have here is a staunch ideology amongst the women that is so strong that you can see that the men who are with them are emasculated. And they know it because it shows in their demeanor. Several things were said, let me not go into the detail, but several things were said by several women that made me think, well, how can he be faithful to you if you wouldn't give him sex, except it's on your terms? You wouldn't give him peace or serenity, except he dances to your beat, and you wouldn't serve him. On one occasion, one of the women talked about her parents and how she despised her father and the relationship her father had with her mother. Now, the parents had been married for 30 plus years. In her words, it's a traditional relationship. And she disagrees with that because she likes the modern relationship. You know, no foul, no harm. But when I spoke to her particularly about what she wanted, she could not identify what she wanted. But she was very, very quick to criticize her father and her mother. And the common theme in all of the women that I interacted with was that they had bought completely into the ideology of womanism and feminism. So much so that there was almost an irritation of the masculine presence in their very being. One of them said, I kid you not, you know, I almost choked on my food when I heard her say this. She was speaking to another woman who was next to her, and she said, the other woman had asked a question about her daughter, who had recently been born. And she said, I cannot wait to raise her into being a raging feminist. I cannot wait to train her into becoming a raging feminist. Her words. Now, it's her child. It's not mine. But it connects very closely to the conversation about infidelity and cheating. Men want peace. Men want women who they can collaborate with, cooperate with, and pair with over a long term. Men crave peace so much that if you were to study the animal kingdom, the men of the species do not stay with, generally speaking, the females of the species. They come back, they have sex, and they leave. They leave the cubs with the mothers, and they leave. Why? They go out into the wilderness where they have peace. A man's desire for peace is so strong that he would do things that are not within his nature just to have a moment of peace. Peace, serenity are interlinked. The way these women spoke about their husband And I thought it was a game, because for me it was quite fascinating, because I was smiling all along because I had started a conversation with you a week before, talking about infidelity and cheating. And as I looked at some of the men on the table and in the event and at the occasion, and even the men who were absent, do you know, I felt that I wouldn't judge them too harshly if it turned out that they were cheating or there was infidelity on their part, because each of the women felt as though that they were sent from the heavens and that these men deserved nothing, and that their presence in the lives of their men was enough, and that they should have been lorded over these men because of their very existence. And in further discussions, it came to light that the three things I talk about, the core needs, sex, servanthood, and serenity, that most of the men in question were not getting either of the three. Let me start with sex, so women can understand. I've talked about this previously. To understand the whole idea of sex and how a man's psyche is conditioned, you have to go to the period before the relationship was formalized. Let's use a week, 7 days. Assuming the man is single and is economically successful, and he is socially successful, his social capital, his economic capital are where they should be. One of the things that is consistent is you might have a man who is single and who's very sexually active, and 5 days out of the week he has women around, and he meets you. At the time he meets you, normally speaking, men are not very upfront in being honest, which I prefer to do and I encourage men to do. You, the woman, might see him once a week or twice a week, but he's having sex 5 times a week or 6 times a week, let's say. But he sees you twice a week. Now, this simply means that even if you're his favorite, on 3 or 4 of the other days, someone else is doing the heavy lifting sexually to satisfy his needs. Let's assume there are 3 other women and then yourself, so there are 4 women. Every week he has his needs met. For some reason he decides that he wants to settle and concentrate with you. And he says to the others, well, it's time for you guys to go. I have chosen someone, I am now married, and I intend to remain with this particular person. But he carries on the relationships with the other women until the point where he says, I'm now officially going into a mono relationship. The mistake men make is that men get into relationships believing that things will stay the same. Although he was seeing you twice a week, every time he saw you, you gave him sex. So you could say he was getting sex from you 2 out of the 6 days which he had sex. That's 30%, or 33.3%. He also saw you on days when you wanted to be seen. You did not come around when you had your period, and you did not come around when you had issues at work and you were not sexually, ready. You came when you wanted to show your best self, and you had no hesitation to give him what he wanted. At the moment he stopped seeing all the other women, psychologically in a man's head, and this is a mistake we make, he assumes that all the heavy lifting done by the other parties will be borne by yourself. In other words, that he would get sex 5 times a week. Now, he used to get 2 from you and 3 from other women. In any case, when you come together, you are excited because he's chosen you, you're married, and for the first week, you give him sex 5 times a week. And then suddenly it starts to regress. It regresses so much that it goes even below the 2 times a week that he used to get from you. Why? Because in a month, You have your cycles, hormonal cycles and biological cycles. So if you exclude one whole week, you've effectively removed 25% of what would have been what he would get from you on a monthly basis. In addition to this, you then compound the fact that you're living together, you go to work, you have issues in your private life. Sometimes you don't feel like it. Sometimes you have issues because he hasn't done the chores, he hasn't cleaned the toilet, etc. Sex then becomes a bargaining chip used by the woman to get whatever she wants. Well, but if you don't clean the kitchen, well, nothing for you tonight. And if you don't do this, and if you don't do this, she then has the monopoly. Whereas previously, when he was single or unmarried, if you did not want to have sex and you came over, he said fine. At 9 o'clock, he sent you away, picks up the phone and called someone who arrived at 11 and met that need. In a committed relationship, he can't do that because he's now married. But he goes from having 5 times a week as a single man or unmarried man, down to 2 times a week, down to, if he's lucky, once a month. And even when he gets it once a month, he has to beg and he has to push and he has to try and he has to buy flowers and everything. The one person who is there to meet his needs refuses to meet his needs because she has a sense that aura of superiority, as though you should be lucky to have me. That's the first part. The second part is what I call serenity. There are stories that abound, I'll give you 2, about how a woman's ability to speak to a man, even when the man is being childish, but speak to him, speak to the king in the man, and how that helps a man transition from behaving in a manner that is not consistent with how he should behave, but lifts him up to a point where he starts to see that he should be the leader and that leader should behave in a certain way. We know 2 stories. The story of Esther in the book of Esther and Queen Vashti, and how Queen Vashti's inability to speak to the king properly, but also publicly, led to her losing the title of queen and led to the process of trying to find a new queen, which Esther ended up filling. One of the great things Esther had was the ability to talk to the king and speak to a man. She was well schooled and groomed and taught how to speak life into a man, which is why women, generally speaking, have an inspirational element to them. But more importantly, how her tongue could be used to destroy everything she's created. There's several saying, with your mouth, a woman builds or destroys. But more importantly, Esther was able to achieve so much more and save a nation of people because she understood the spirit of communication and the good faith principle. Now, another story has to do with King David and Abigail. Now, Abigail was David's first wife by choice, not by gifting. King Saul gifted David his daughter when David defeated Goliath in the valley. That was one of the things, the rewards that was given to the person who would defeat the giant. Abigail was one of the women that David married afterwards. I think it was his first, could be second, but she was certainly one of the first ones married. And the way David came about choosing Abigail was not because he knew her from previously. David and his soldiers had spent some time around the farm that belonged to this rich, wealthy man, Nabal. And they protected the man's wealth, sheep, cattle, and all of that. And on one particular day, David sent words to this rich man to say, listen, I am David, and I am running away from King Saul. My men and I have stayed around your area, and we have protected what belongs to you. Would you be so kind to give to myself and my men one of your little lambs so that we can eat. And in return, the rich wealthy man sent back his servants with a reply that was very insulting to David. So much so that David said to his men, strap on all of your swords. We're going to go into that village and we're going to kill all the men and all the livestock that belong to this wealthy man, including him, because he's dishonored, he's insulted me, David. On their way, unbeknown to David, the servants who went to David to pass the information also told another servant who went to his wife, this wealthy man's wife, and said, listen, this is what your husband has done. He has sent servants to David, but in a very dishonoring way. And we fear for our lives because we know who David is. David is the one who killed Goliath. She gets up, prepares a meal, prepares a banquet, packages everything up, gets a few of her servants, and starts traveling down towards where she heard David was staying. Along the way, here comes David. What does she do? She gets off her camels, presents all of her meals on the road in a presentable manner, gets on her knees, and starts to speak to David in a kingly fashion. And she reminds David of how great he is. He says, we've heard about you. You're the one who killed Goliath. You know, Saul killed 1,000, and you, David, you killed tens of 1,000. And she spoke to David in such a powerful manner that here you had this person who was supposed to be a king, David, because he had been ordained, acting like a fool, going to kill a whole nation, group of people, community, because he was hungry and he felt insulted. But the manner in which Abigail spoke to David was so powerful. She spoke to the king in David when the kid was behaving in a very poor behaved manner. David's temperament changed. Just imagine being praised and reminded of your greatness by a woman. He accepts the food, turns around, and goes home. So a woman with a good mouth saves an entire community because she knew how to speak to a man. Not too long afterwards, the wealthy man dies of a heart attack. David sends a message to his wife and says, I'm going past, I'm passing through your area and I'm going to stop. It'd be nice to meet you. David married Abigail simply because of how she spoke to him. Now, the reason I have used those two stories is to show that the way a man receives from a woman is different. Serenity and peaceful and the ability to communicate clearly, but also very respectfully, is what men crave. In the occasion that I was in, I didn't feel that any of those women that I came into contact with, I'm not saying all of the women, the ones I came into contact with, there wasn't a reverence, an admiration. There wasn't a spirit of peaceful cooperation and coexistence with the men in their lives. As a matter of fact, some of the things I heard, I was embarrassed. For some of the men who were not present, I said to my beloved, I do not look forward to meeting her husband or meeting her long-term partner. Why? Because the way she has spoken about him in a despicable manner, in a manner that is not glowing, in a manner that doesn't make me think he has good character and good judgment, by choosing her as a spouse. Not because he's a bad man, no. He's an intelligent man. But a man, by accepting a woman of such a disposition, in effect, it tells me that he's not aware of his greatness as a man. Sex is important, serenity is important, and then servanthood. Most men cheat these days because they're looking to be served, not physically, Sometimes it's psychological. Sometimes it's emotionally. Remember what I say. Now I'm going to say something that I think women could learn something from shortly. Provision, protection, the priestly duties, and his presence. Provision, protection, the priestly duties, and his presence, which is how he professes his love. The way a woman serves a man is in relation to each of those four areas. So it doesn't matter whether he comes back with very little bacon. There should be an act of servanthood in you accepting and receiving what he brings home. I would say, in my opinion, one of the things women could learn to avoid infidelity and cheating is the gift of receiving from a man. How you receive his presence, how you receive his gifts, how you receive his words, how you receive his trials and tribulations. But you have to be good at receiving. And receiving is such an easy thing, because the reaction from the art of receiving is what you gift back to the person given to you. So for example, if you are of the womanist feminist ideology, and whatever he says has to be met with an argument, then you're not receiving him. If on the other hand, you hold to heart what he says, his words are planted in your heart, and therefore when you meet people, you're speaking his words to other people. In many ways, it goes to the concept that if you've seen the Father, myself, you've already seen the Father, which in the sessions that I did, I talked about how a man's words and himself are one. And I was saying to my beloved, I would hope that many women will understand that women are a spitting image of their husbands or their significant others. So if a person meets your husband or your significant other, they have met you in spirit, because you should represent him and he should represent you so well that when people meet you, they either say, I can't wait to meet his wife, because he's very kind and gentle, disciplined, he's very conscientious, dutiful, hardworking. I cannot wait to meet his wife. Likewise, when a woman is very feminine, but still assertive, kind, gentle, humble, forgiving, loving, most people will say, I cannot wait to meet the man who has this gift, who is blessed with her presence. So it's important to understand that servanthood is such a useful thing. And if you haven't been taught how to be a wife, and this is what's very sad, a lot of the people I met over the weekend were not taught how to be wives. They were also taught by women who come from the baby boom generation, who, in my opinion, they and my generation, Generation X, have done the most harm to society's fabric. The teaching of what I consider to be a very inwardly approach to life, the me. You know, nothing is objective, everything is subjective, and it's all about how I feel. And that the world revolves around me, and almost narcissistic, so much so that most women have been raised not to understand how, with servanthood, it doesn't mean you're a servant. It simply means there is a level of gifting I'm giving you where I'm giving you the authority to provide for me, to protect me, to profess your love, and to be the priest over my life. And take away the burden of me having to do all of that myself. Now, this does not mean that if you are a woman, you cannot provide for yourself. One of the women went as far as saying, well, I don't need a man. I don't need a man to provide for me. I don't need a man to protect me. I don't feel unsafe. I'm doing quite well. I make my money. And when asked, well, what do you want? What do you want for the long term? She also said, I don't really know. I don't know if I want to have a family. I do not know if I want to have a husband or be married. It was quite sad. And when you see such as a man like myself, objectively, not knowing these people, I feel sad, because what it signifies is that it doesn't matter the man that comes into your life. And I said this to the person, and I'll say this to you for women. You have to get curious about men and become fascinated about the male journey. You have to study men. You have to know what we want. And most importantly, you have to give us what we want. Very, very directly, let me say as follows. The whole idea of infidelity and cheating is negated if you failed in the basic duties that you were supposed to provide to the man in your life, and for which you were the only person who can meet those needs. If you're failing in those areas, then you cannot use infidelity as a conversational topic. Why? Because you failed in your responsibilities. And I should say this carefully. We don't get what, many of us get what we deserve. Some of us get who we are. Some of us get what we negotiate. Some of us get what we reap, rather what we sow. And infidelity, in most cases, when you unpeel the act and you say, well, why did he go astray? I'll give you another example. Different person, different scenario, not present in the conversation. They had been married for a number of years. And one day he just decided, picked up his bag and says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm moving down, moving out. You can keep the 2 kids. I'll see them every other day, but I'm done. And she was stunned. And I was explaining through a third party that it's no surprise, because when I met the woman for the first time, it was no different from the women I met this weekend. You know, most women in the West have been raised to believe that you guys are gold dust, that the world revolves around you, that we're lucky to have you, that you're the cherry on top of the pie or cake, and that we're supposed to be beholden to you. So much so that the level of disrespect that men get, even in the marriage, is so high. And part of the reason for this, let me say this as I conclude, part of the reason for this goes back to a conversation I had last week where I talked about the balance of power. At 24, she has to leverage. The balance of power is in her hands, especially if their age are similar. If it's 26 and she's 24, she has the power because she has beauty, youth, fertility, chastity, femininity. But as he starts to get older, he starts to convert his potential to actuality. And in this particular instance, this man in question had just gone past 35. And he had come into his financial earnings, and he was making good money, and his business was doing very well. His wife was now 33 plus. She wasn't 10 years younger. The balance of power had shifted. He started to come into his understanding of his true worth, because he started to realize that there are younger women, more attractive than his wife, 10 years younger than his wife, who desire him and who want to give him honor, servitude, submission, sex, serenity. Whereas for the last 7-8 years, all he's had from his wife was war. Wasn't getting sex, no peace, no servitude, treated as though he was the 3rd child or the 4th child. And it got to a point where he said, enough. I can afford to have a better life, and that life can be without you. And I can have all of my other needs met by other people. And she was stunned. And I said, through a third party, you never took the responsibility of wife seriously, because you never cared for, because of the ideology, again, another one who is very strong on the woman is feminist nonsense. I says, because you never took into account that men are necessary and we're important, and we go where we are needed, wanted, and loved, and we exit places where we are made to feel that our core needs are barbaric, made to feel as though we don't deserve anything, and eventually we look for places where we find peace. And that is exactly what this man did in this particular instance. So as I conclude today's session, let me say as follows. Let me use a business analogy. Think about a producer and a consumer as two people who have a shared interest. The producer has to produce a product. The consumer has to be accepting of that product. If the producer produces a product and the consumer doesn't really like it, the producer should go back and find out through feedback what the consumer and their preferences are. And they should tailor that product slightly or modify the product to meet the consumer's tastes. In other words, the consumer consumes the product produced by the producer. And any producer that wants to be successful, firstly, they have to understand what does the customer want. And very simply, give the customer what they want. Now, Steve Jobs was a very arrogant CEO, very genius, but he was one of the few that came up with the idea that consumers do not know what they want. And he was right in many ways in creating the new Apple, and all of the products, because he says, no, we're going to produce a phone in a certain way because the consumer do not know what they want, so we're going to show them what they should have. Now, he pulled it off. But most CEOs are not Steve Jobs, and most producers were not Steve Jobs. The way things work is to understand what the customer wants and then simply give the customer what they want. And when it comes to the basic needs, men will be satisfied if you give them what they want. The basic needs: sex, serenity, servanthood. Very simple. If you do that and do it exceptionally well, with excellence and with grace and with excitement and gladly, that's a distinction. You get 70% of his needs met. He can survive without his seasonal needs or the new tastes he acquires. In conclusion, infidelity and cheating can be avoided completely if women understood that on the other side you have someone who is a consumer of what you are and what you produce. And until you give men what they want, you will not have peace, because there will be another woman who wants to take what you have and give him what he wants. In order to know what he wants, there has to be an interest in understanding men, studying the man in your life, asking him questions, and just simply giving him what he wants. This is not rocket science. This is very easy. On the other hand, if you choose not to, if you continue to believe that men should take what you offer, or that men do not know what they want, or men are being cultured and brainwashed by society to expect certain things, then you will always have the risk that you could be the one who is cheated on, or the one who infidelity is the aura around your home, or something else. Now, in closing, I hope this has been useful.